You ready?
Yeah.
You sure?
Let's do it.
Hey everybody, Blake and Forrest from the AnKing team. We're really excited to be here working with AMBOSS. We are very grateful for all the questions that have been submitted, and we're excited to go ahead and address these, and hopefully it can be useful for some of you out there. So yeah, let's dive into our first question. Mia at Charles Drew University asked, do you have any suggestions for the best way to optimize studying for Step 1 and Step 2 together with AMBOSS/Anki or other resources, considering taking them after core rotations, which is for them? Yeah. So basically, how would you prep for both of them simultaneously using both of these resources, AMBOSS and Anki?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because there's a lot of users who need to prepare for both Step 1 and Step 2 at the same time. And so you need a lot of foundational principles and a lot of like basic science knowledge for Step 1. And the clinical application of that comes in with Step 2. So the advice that I would give to that student is to spend the first years of medical school just as you would as any other school, preparing for Step 1 using their Anki cards. And then once you have a solid enough foundation to start using the AMBOSS practice questions efficiently, introduce that into your study schedule. And after you've introduced AMBOSS, you'll be practicing Step 1 questions, and then you start the clinical rotations, and you'll start to introduce Step 2 questions into your study schedule while you're keeping Step 1 Anki cards still going in your daily routine. And that burden will shrink over time as your cards begin to what we call mature. As your cards get older, they'll show up less often, and your Step 2 material will appear more frequently in addition to your practice questions.
Okay, Nick, I've got the first question for you.
Okay.
At Avachand07 from the University of Nevada, Reno School of Medicine. They ask, for Step 1, I've used Boards and Beyond and the matching cards in the AnKing deck. As for Step 2, how would you go about unsuspending cards in an organized fashion?
Ooh, this is also a question we get a lot.
It's a tough one.
And it's not an easy question to answer.
No, it's not.
The Step 1 deck is really well made. The Step 2 deck is not as superior for sure. And I think part of that just stems from everyone's busy, so those making the flashcards during that time were busy, and that leads to less cards and less quality, and so it's not as comprehensive. There is not an easy way like there is with Step 1, where you can just watch a Boards and Beyond video and then unlock cards, or watch a sketchy video and unlock cards. The whole community realizes that this is something we want to improve. It hasn't come to fruition yet, but in the future I think there will be better ways. The other thing is, and I don't know how you felt with it, is that most of the Step 2 content is stuff you already know. You're just putting it into an algorithm or something that makes sense. Yeah.
And so I think it's a lot of learning on the job and using flashcards to fill in your knowledge where you need it, which makes it a lot harder. You have to self-identify weaknesses.
Yeah, and it's true, you'll be on rotations and you'll take care of a ton of diabetes patients, and so you won't need flashcards on that, but then you might not. I did a pediatric surgery rotation, so I didn't see any of the adult general surgery, and I needed to do flashcards on that. But when it came to appendicitis, I had done that plenty of times. So it's just a very different year, and your study strategy, everyone's not going to fit into one mold, kind of like they do with the preclinical stuff. All right, next question. You ready?
We'll see. Yeah.
This one is from Tiastar27. He or she says, what is the best way to incorporate AMBOSS diagrams and tables into Anki?
That's a great question. We think the best approach anyway is using the extra fields that we've provided in the AnKing card type. And I think what you can do is you can use the batch edit feature. The batch edit add-on is probably the best approach. So you can take a bunch of cards that are all related to the same diagram or table, put that table of cards into the lecture notes field for all the related cards.
Yeah.
That would be what I would do.
Yeah, if you have anti-arrhythmics and you got a great table
That's a good point.
out of the AMBOSS table, and you just find that tag and just add it to all of them under lecture notes. That's a great way.
Yeah. And then as you're reviewing your cards, right, you do the card and then you open the lecture notes field and you'll see, oh yeah, there's the table that I threw in my anti-arrhythmic cards. Oh, that's the big picture. I need to remember this detail. Yeah. That's what I would do. I don't know. You got anything else?
That's a great idea. Yeah.
All right, Zaid from Jordan asked, what do you think is the best way to use Anki to get the best results? When should you start doing Anki decks in the timeline and of your preparation?
That's a really easy question for me to answer. I spend a lot of time tutoring students one-on-one, and I've tried a lot of study methods myself. The best way to use Anki and the best time to use Anki is to jump in day one of medical school. Some people choose to even get a head start by learning some of the worst parts of medical school, like biochemistry, and some might argue immunology is one of the harder sections of medical school. But even if you don't get a head start, starting on day one of medical school is essential because you have to remember all of this information for years to come. And Anki will never let you forget information. If you use it every single day, the way that it's intended, then you'll supposedly never forget information. And that's the goal. And that was true for me.
You're totally right. There's a second part of this question I'm going to ask you. Thelma from the Dominican Republic had a question. It says, what do you suggest is the best way to start using Anki? A good strategy to keep up with the cards and not let them accumulate?
Yeah, that's something that every student struggles with at some point or another. And so to avoid having too many cards build up, you need to follow our video on the most or the best recommended settings for Anki, because the settings will affect how Anki works for you for the rest of your career. If you keep yourself limited to a certain amount of new cards per day and you study them every day, you will hopefully not fall into the trap of having too many cards.
Yeah, I think it's also important to recognize that if you don't want to get into that spot where there's too many cards accumulating and it becomes overwhelming, have a designated schedule. You can't just say, I'm going to do this every day. You need to know when and how you're going to do it. Personally, for me, the only way to keep up with Anki was if I did it first thing in the morning. You know, if it was there and I was really tired after maybe clinical rotations or something, I would have maybe skipped it. But if I just got up and I did it first thing in the morning, then that was my way to avoid, cards building up and altering what the algorithm has to offer for me.
Absolutely. And I think Anki has a stats page that kind of shows you when you were most effective in the day. And it was always the mornings.
All right. The next question here, this is from @Med Renagerto from Peru. He says, what do you think about using pre-made decks from friends and yours and reading books as the only source for study? Do you think you can avoid card creation and still have success?
Okay, well, first off, hola mi amigo de Peru, un gusto. Joking aside though, I think that's a great question. I think that's kind of the question of how do you study in medical school? And the way I look at it, and you can tell me if you think differently, but I look at medical school as you need a primary resource to learn, you need a way to review, and you need a way to test yourself. Primary learning resource can be anything like lectures, Boards and Beyond videos, other online videos like Sketchy, Pathoma. Then you need a review resource. Flashcards work really well. Obviously, we think Anki is the best of the options.
We think it's okay.
A little bit, And those don't need to be cards you're making. They can be cards other people have made. In fact, your life's a lot easier if you use pre-made decks. Again, we would recommend the AnKing deck. It's the most complete and the best of all of them. And, if you are using a deck that someone at your school's made that's tailored to your curriculum, we're not going to tell you not to. If you feel like that's what you should do, do it. But then you do need to hit that third point still. You need some way to test yourself and force yourself to apply the knowledge you're learning, which the best way to do that we've found is question banks. And obviously we think AMBOSS is the best question bank, but there are lots out there and you can tailor things to your needs. So I think kind of in summation, you need a learning resource, which can be your textbooks, it can be your lectures or videos, a review resource, which tends to be flashcards. We recommend Anki and the AnKing deck. And then you need a kind of examination testing resource, which is question banks.
Yeah.
Anything you'd say?
I mean, ultimately, past that, your only application stuff is going to be working in the hospital with patients. And that's where you're really going to apply and everything you've learned. And that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to be a fantastic physician to help all of your patients. But it sounds like you're on the right track.
Cool. Ready for the next one?
I'm ready.
Okay. Got a question from @Andrew Lee Davis from UT Southwestern. Andrew asks, do you have any tips for people making decks similar to yours, but for residency? Specifically optho, if that helps.
That's a good question. And then firstly, I'm excited that you want to do that. That's really exciting. So the tips I would give you is one, realize that you're stepping into quite a big project here. The AnKing deck has been far bigger of a feat than I ever thought it was. But we are working on the Anki Hub project, which should hopefully make this a lot easier.
Yeah.
The next thing is you just need to be really organized. So we make a Google Sheets that we can share with everybody. We list out, all the chapters and subsections of, with the derm deck that I'm helping work on, all the subsections, and then somebody signs up and says, I'm going to do this subsection, and someone else says they're going to do this subsection. So you're not overlapping. And then you share with each other, you quality check each other's work, make sure not everyone's great at making flashcards. Even I make poor flashcards a lot of the time. And so you quality check each other and then kind of come together, add all those flashcards together. And if you do that, I mean, that's the real start, is getting really organized at first. I think it's awesome that you want to do an ophthalmology deck. I would post on Reddit, post on wherever, try and get people to help you, just have a centralized place. I use Slack. We get everybody into one Slack group where we can all communicate about it. Get everyone in a group chat, make a Google Sheet, and send us a message. If you're like really stumbling over or not sure how to do something, we would all love to help with that, because it would be my dream to see every single residency with their own Anki deck. That would be cool.
All right. Carlotta Pazzi, SKMC, and she is going to graduate in 2024. What is the best workflow to use AMBOSS and Anki together? Will there be a possibility on the future to link an Anki card to a set of practice questions on AMBOSS?
That's a really good question. The best way to use them together is, if you haven't tried the Anki add-on for that AMBOSS has provided, then you're missing out. Anki can be really isolating in some ways. You're doing a lot of different flashcards. These facts come in kind of a random order at times. And sometimes you lose kind of the context of what you're talking about. But when you have that add-on, you can just go and hover over a term, and you can pull up the lessons and the articles that are related to that within the AMBOSS library. And that allows you to get that context again and give you back to, where you were, and help you kind of keep that flow with your Anki reviews going. So that's the number one way to bridge them together. And then whether or not you can, I think he was asking about whether, my Anki reviews and the questions can kind of link together in a way. We're not there yet, but we're working on it. We're trying to figure that out for us in the future. There's a lot of discussion. It'd be really cool. It's exactly what we wish we could do. If you were just missing a bunch of questions on, say, kidney disease or something, and be able to start a question bank and supplement that. Mm-hmm. So it's in the works. It's just not here yet for us at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We've got one from @AnnaPaul from Brazil. Here she asks, what are the best Anki add-ons to improve the experience of studying?
To improve the experience. Okay.
Interesting question.
That is a good question. Because Anki's boring. I'm going to be, I don't want to lie. I mean,
there's nothing fun about doing 600 flashcards.
No, but getting a game controller was hands down one of the best.
That was a fun one.
I know. You had an Xbox controller, and I bought some cheap PlayStation controller, hooked it up. That is a big game changer, as opposed to hit the space bar all day.
It's that dopamine release of playing video games.
It is. That I would definitely recommend the controller, hands down. That seriously improved the experience for sure. It isn't an add-on per se, but other add-ons that improve the experience. There's two ways. There's ones that make Anki easier to use and add features and stuff, and then there's ones that make it more fun to use. I shouldn't take away the boring. It's still going to be boring to an extent, but the ones that improve the experience, we've listed a ton on our website. There's 50 or something that I think are really helpful. Yeah. Image occlusion is a huge one.
100% recommend that. I couldn't do Anki without image occlusion.
That one, the symbols add-on where you can, easily add symbols to things, image resizing, all of those I think make the experience better. They make it more comfortable for you. You can do a lot more things with those features. There's not any great...
Which one did Blake like that he had a cat show up?
Oh yeah, Blake had this kitten rewards add-on, right? After every 10 or 20 flashcards, you get this cute little kitten pop up. Those kind of add-ons are great.
I thought it was creepy, to be honest. But
yeah, that's Blake.
Blake got some dopamine from it.
But yeah, those kind of add-ons I think make it fun. There's not any true game add-ons. Finding an Anki partner, that's not an add-on like you were asking, but I think that's probably what I would say is the best answer.
No, I think that's fair. Like I said, I don't think there's anything inherently fun about doing 600 flashcards. But I think it's fun when you get a good test score afterwards.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Or you get to your third year and you're like, wow, that worked. I remember things.
Yeah. On the wards what to give people and like, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Let's see. This next question is from @DHedge. What role, if any, did Anki play in your third year? And if you needed to transition your style of learning during third and fourth years, do you have any related advice for rising MS3s?
Okay. So kind of rephrasing that, making sure I'm on the right page. How do we use Anki during third year?
Yep.
And then like, how do you do that adjustment to just clinical learning?
Yeah.
So I think I'll tackle the Anki question. Yeah. I think most of us used Anki to some extent in third year, but less than in our preclinical years. I think I said this already, but again, the idea is you use Anki to really fill in gaps.
Yeah.
If you're not seeing patients who have appendicitis, use Anki to learn and kind of refresh and make sure you're good at managing appendicitis. Mm-hmm. And so I think using it and filtering, I think the goal is in third year actually kind of opposite of first and second year, less cards, less time, so that you can really dive into your clinical and like look good on the wards.
Yeah. I think what I really learned in third year was it was on my OB-GYN rotation and I decided I was going to make one flashcard for every practice question I missed.
That's a good approach.
And I did really well on that rotation. So I think, like Tyson's saying, use Anki more to focus in on those areas where you're weak and let your clinical experience help because.
Yeah. And then kind of tackling the second half of this question, how do you adjust your learning style? I hate saying this, but I think it's trial and error.
Yeah.
Like I think I learned far better on my pediatrics rotation that was at the end of my third year than I did on my neurology rotation that was my first rotation. And I think you have to kind of gather this idea of like, how do I learn clinically? How do I learn from patients? How do I learn from rounds? And rounds can be awful. That's true. But you have to learn from rounds. And it's a trial and error. You try something and you know what? We talked about that on rounds yesterday. We talked about hydrocephalus and I still don't know anything about hydrocephalus. So what I did didn't work. One thing I found really helpful is that if something came up on rounds, usually I tried to do one thing per patient my team rounded on. I would write down one topic that I was going to learn about from that patient. And sometimes it was as simple as I looked up a drug, carbamazepine, that night, and I would make a goal for each patient. I learned one thing. That was what I did.
No, I think that's a great idea. I wanted to be at home and present when I got home, right? And so I had the hours when I was in the hospital to study. And third year is you're going to learn as much as you want to learn. If you want to sit around all day, you'll sit around all day. And so since I wanted to be home and with my family when I got home, I used every second I could in the hospital. And like Tyson said, I think it's a great idea, write stuff down. Like I'm going to learn this about this patient, this about this patient. And if you're asking the residents to teach you about those patients, you're going to get better subjective grades from doing that anyway. But if you're active and engaged, you're going to learn a lot. Yeah.
And learning from the residents is a great point that you brought up. The reality is the residents are in that field because that's what they want to do. Like your neurology residents want to be neurologists. Your surgery residents want to be surgeons. They're passionate about that field. And when people ask you about things you're passionate about, you naturally talk and teach.
Yeah.
So using your residents is a great resource.
I agree.
Okay, Mohammed from Jordan and Mika from the Philippines. They ask, is there any way to use AMBOSS, the AMBOSS add-on on AnkiDroid or iOS? Would the AMBOSS and the AnKing feature be available also in the Anki mobile app?
Yeah, this is actually a recent thing, and so this is actually available now. There is mobile support. I can kind of summarize it all in that way. So they're using an iPad or an iPhone, a Droid device or anything like that. They do now support the Anki add-on. You can have those pop-up definitions and link it to the articles and all that kind of stuff. And so that's a reality as we speak right now. There's going to be future, enhancements to it. AMBOSS is always trying to, push the envelope and making it a better add-on and more functional for students. So if anyone has any ideas on how to improve it, other features that you would like to see, you can always send that over to AMBOSS. You can send it to us at AnKing. We can, collaborate on it and figure out if it's something that's feasible to work on in the future.
Let's see. We got a question from @ParKim from Neomed. Will there be a way to condense similar Anki card concepts together while reviewing old cards so that you still get the spaced repetition benefit without having to do more than 500 plus cards a day? They say sort of like an AMBOSS mixed block that'll highlight certain concepts that you struggle with more frequently.
Ooh, that's
a hard question.
That's a really hard question.
I'm glad I'm not answering
Good
it.
question. That's a good question. I think a lot of people have really struggled with this over the years. If you look at the step 1 deck, those flashcards are like 1 fact each. If you look at the step 2 deck, they try to combine 4 or 5 facts into it. But one of the key things they say in really formulating good flashcards and learning knowledge is that you need to get it to a bite-sized thing. And the spaced repetition really only works if it's that bite-sized amount, because you need to be able to say, this one I don't need anymore, this one I do need to review, this one I've mastered, and this one I need to review. And when you combine it all together, now you've got 2 things in that flashcard that maybe you need to review more often, and 2 things that you don't. And because you need to review 2 of them, you're gonna review the whole thing more. And so we naturally want to combine things. And I think a lot of us think like, if we have 250 flashcards, that's better than 500 flashcards. And that's not true. If you have 250 flashcards that have 4 facts each versus 500 flashcards that have 1 fact each, you actually have more information on the other one. So I would encourage you not to combine that information. I would utilize Anki's algorithm a little better. Hit the easy button more frequently if you really are thinking things are easy. Use the again and the hard button to review certain topics more often. I would not necessarily try and combine things too much. I know there's a temptation to do that, but all my personal experience with Anki and what the experts are saying is that that's going to be less effective.
Okay, I think we got one more question for you. This one's a doozy.
Okay.
This is from @RohanMane6841. He or she asks, I am an international student studying at the Medical University of Ukraine, and due to the war, had to postpone my plan to take step 1 next year. So this person says they currently have approximately 430 days till their exam. How can I spread out my Anki scheduling to accommodate the cards, and what would be the ideal number of cards to do each day so that I can complete the step 1 deck? So I think we'll tackle that in like 2 pieces. Okay. So the first one I want you to talk about is how many cards do I need to do each day to finish my cards in a set amount of time?
Yeah, that's a good question. Firstly, with being there in Ukraine with everything going on, I just want to let you know, all of us and our families and everything, we're all praying for you. Yeah. We're very sorry for everything that's going on.
You have our most sincere condolences.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it's like to be, especially trying to study medicine with everything going on there. This is a really good question though, and one that we actually get quite frequently. I would recommend starting backwards. Start at your test date. So you said 400 and something days from now. I would start at that date and then look at how many practice questions you need to do and how many practice tests you need to do, because that's the stuff you want to do right before the test. Then work backwards and plan, I'm going to do these tests on these days. I'm going to do 120 questions a day, which means I need this much time. And now you know how much time you have to do Anki flashcards because you've got the practice questions scheduled in. And then go look at how many days do you have, how many days off a week do you want, all of those things. And then do the math on, here's this many flashcards and whatever. I'd also tell you, especially with step 1 being pass-fail, don't feel like you need to finish the entire Anki deck. I think practice questions are going to be far superior. They're going to help you a lot better. It's definitely a good idea to get a lot of those Anki flashcards down. Over the course of the year, the spaced repetition is going to help a lot. But start with your test date and work backwards and actually write a plan out. Get a calendar, write it down. I'm going to take this test on this day. I'm going to do these practice questions. And then you can actually do the math. It might take you a half hour or an hour to plan everything, but it makes the next year so much easier. You know exactly what you need to wake up and do every day.
Okay, so the second half of this question says that he or she was planning on studying with Boards and Beyond, Pathoma, Sketchy, Micro, Sketchy Farm, and they were planning on redoing it all before their test date. Do you think they should do that, or would you recommend something different?
Good question. Okay. So if you've already done some of it, I wouldn't necessarily redo it. It depends on how long it's been. If it's been a while since you've done it, maybe you do need to redo it. But some of that stuff, especially if you've already learned it, and I know being an international graduate and then having to study for this is a different ball game. But I would recommend if you feel pretty familiar with cardiac physiology and pathology, don't feel like you need to redo all of those videos.
Yeah.
If you've forgotten all of the microbiology and the pharmacology side effects and things like that, then maybe it's worthwhile to redo those videos. I would not, give you a blanket statement and say definitely redo everything. A lot of people fall into this trap of, if I do every practice question and if I do every Anki card, I'm going to do well. I wouldn't do that. Yeah, don't give yourself a blanket statement. Really focus in on what things do I know well and what things do I not know well, and focus on those. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is this question isn't specific to you. This applies to people who have to take a year off for any reason, right?
Yeah.
Like our friends who have to take gap years, who have family emergencies, who take a research year.
Yeah.
How do you recover that time and like the fact that knowledge degrades with time? And I love what Nick said. I think, again, it's a lot of self-evaluation and like saying, how comfortable am I with any given topic?
Yeah. Yep. No, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Thanks again, everyone, for sending in questions. We remind you that both AnKing and AMBOSS are dedicated to answering student questions and making sure you have all the resources necessary to succeed during medical school. We've been through the process. AMBOSS is intimately involved in medical student life and improving it. So we remind you that we have lots of resources at your fingertips to get more help.
Yeah, we're grateful for all of your support, and we wish you the best of luck.